Thank you. My title is Reason and Its Other, the Cognitive and Non-Cognitive. Again, like Dr. Anderson was saying, I was inspired in my first philosophy class I was inspired by reason. That we could know things was fascinating to me. I was a skeptic, atheist when I started my philosophy class, so I learned about reason, and I became fascinated with reason. I guess maybe I'm obsessed with reason. And so started studying reason. I did my dissertation on what is knowledge, and I wanted to do a syntopical study of reason, and so I looked into the great book Syntopicon, and there's no entry on reason. So I thought I should make that entry. And so this paper, I hope, will develop into a larger project where I study what is reason and what is reason not. Because we use the word reason a lot, but we're not very clear on the definition. And so the title, Reason and Its Other, is inspired by a book that I am reading that is it's pretty disturbing. It's about postmodern German philosophy. And basically it's a rejection of Enlightenment reason, whatever that is, for the other of reason. And some of the others that are mentioned are things like nature, the body, art, madness. And so I started to compile a list of things that people react to when they think of reason, a list of things that people respond to as objections to reason, and that's sort of the basis of this talk tonight. All right, so what is reason, though? Professor Gangadine has written a short paper that I received in my first philosophy class called Reason. It's the Reason handout. This is the best handout I've ever received in my entire life, and I tell my students that now when I use it. I say, laminate this, tattoo it on your mind, and maybe put it under your glass on your table, and people come over, look at that handout, and tell them about it. Because what he does is he nails down a definition. What is reason? What is reason in itself? What is the nature of reason? How would you answer that question? I don't want you to tell me out loud, but think about it. How would you answer that? What is reason? What is the nature of it? What is the essence of it? What you hear, what I tell you he said is it's not going to be surprising. It's just putting the two together was very, very helpful. It's nailing it down. Reason in itself, the nature of reason, is the laws of thought. And we know the laws of thought, right? The law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle. That is reason in itself, okay? And reason in itself is not fallible, it's laws. Reason in itself is self-evident. It's self-evident that we think, right? You're thinking right now. So it's self-evident there are laws for thinking. And that's what we call reason. All right, so if we just hold on to that, reason in itself is the laws of thought, then we could make a lot of headway in what reason is and what it isn't. But you want to know about what do we do with these laws? I mean, so what, right? Here are these laws. We use them, but we use them fallibly. So reason in itself, the laws are not fallible, but our use of them is fallible. That's why we take critical thinking classes. That's why we take logic classes. That's why we have a community of like-minded people where we can run, or even people with other views. We could run our ideas by each other and question each other's reasoning, right? This is why philosophy is done best in community. So we can check each other's reasoning. But notice I'm using the word reasoning now, which isn't the same as reason. So what is reasoning? It's how we use reason. And this short handout has several ways we use reason. And the first one, I think you will find very familiar. We use reason to form concepts. We grasp the nature of things. Maybe this is what you guys are talking about. We grasp the genus. We grasp what something is, and then we express it with words. We grasp concepts. We express concepts with words. And words are like my sharing the idea that's here in my mind with you in your mind. I'm trying to get the idea from here to here. So a word is a means for doing that, right? Word is a carrier of meaning, right? So we can talk about reason and the word or the logos. This is what I've been fascinated with. What is this logos? So the logos is is reason in our minds, but it's grasping what's out there too. The logos in the thing. So there's this fit between our mind and what's out there, the thing. And words are the logos that expresses what's in our minds and what's in the thing. So concepts are expressed by words, and concepts are grasping the essential nature of a thing, and we could more or less grasp what a thing is. That's why we grow in our understanding of things, right? We also use reason to form judgments. Judgments are when we put two concepts together. S is P. Ice cream is good. I don't know if that may be a matter of taste. I don't know if that's like a proper judgment. The good is knowledge. And judgments are about what is. So we're trying to get to reality when we make judgments. And judgments are either true or false, right? So we can connect the logos with truth at this level. And we want to get at the truth of things. But we could make false judgments. So this is where we need to be careful in our reasoning. And then reason is used to form arguments, concepts, judgments, arguments, Aristotle's 3 acts of the mind. And arguments are our way of proving that we've gotten to the truth. We reason with each other to get knowledge, right? Plato talks about knowledge is a true belief that's tied down with a logos or a reason or an argument. But an argument can be unsound, right? It can lack validity, it can lack truth. So we could make mistakes in reasoning. And these are the areas where we generally do make mistakes, right? Particularly in naming things or misnaming things. So we need more. So the next use of reason is that it's a test for meaning. And we want to get meaning. We're the kinds of beings that need meaning. And we ask each other, what do you mean? We're doing it here tonight, or today, all day, right? Talking about the necessity for defining our terms. And this is what Socrates is always after. You use this word justice. What do you mean? What is the nature of justice? What is justice in itself, right? So we can call the first use of reason, the 3 acts of the mind, a kind of descriptive use of reason. This is what humans do, but there's a normative aspect to testing for meaning. We're going to call this the normative use of reason, or I called it the carefulness criterion somewhere else. That there's a moral obligation to be careful in our reasoning, and we call this the ethics of belief sometimes, right? So we ought to think critically. There is a duty involved in reasoning sometimes. We want to make sure that the words we express are meaningful words. We want the judgments that we use to be true, and we want the arguments that we give to each other to be sound. So have we used reason to test our most basic beliefs, our philosophical beliefs, for meaning? Have we used reason to establish the truth of our claims about ultimate reality or about the good life? Is there a moral obligation to do that? And I feel like we're calling others to account in this Congress, maybe the reductionists, maybe the materialists, but I feel like this is a moral obligation for all of us. And maybe we're living in this, pluralistic age where the tables is a level playing field. Everyone gets to give an account to everyone else for their philosophical assumptions. Maybe that's the moral obligation that's involved in reasoning. We also use reason to interpret our experiences. I think this came up earlier today too. We interpret our experiences in light of our basic assumptions about reality. We have experiences of the external world, we have experiences of our thought world, our emotional and volitional world, and we have to make sense of these experiences because the experiences are not self-certifying. So reason is the tool that we use to interpret or give meaning to our experiences. Recently, Dr. Redpath was in an interview that I was listening to, and he said, and I'm not sure if he was quoting Aquinas, but he said, we reason with our senses and we sense with our reason. Was that Aquinas?
Sense with our intellect.
Gilson. We sense with our intellect. What I think this might mean is that we're constantly in this world of input, data, and we have to interpret those experiences constantly. So we're not sheer sensing beings, and we're not sheer reasoning beings. We're reasoning about our experiences all the time, right? And we have to make sense of it. And if it doesn't make sense, that is not acceptable for humans. Lastly, reason is used to construct a world and life view, a coherent world and life view. And this may be what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about cultural myth. Everyone has this world and life view that they construct, and reason is the tool that helps us to systematize beliefs. There are belief systems, and we have a system of beliefs. And sometimes parts of the system conflict. There are contradictions in our system, and reason is the tool that's telling us, hey, something is not coherent here, it's incoherent. And this is also where we may want to say that there is a cultural and historical aspect to reasoning, because this is going to be a critique from the postmoderns. They're going to say, you philosophers, you analytic philosophers in particular, forget history, and you forget the historical situation. So in the systematic use of reason, there is something cultural and historical in our use of reason, and we see systems in conflict, and we see challenges from one system to another, and that causes us to have to deal with those challenges. And this is our world today, kind of worldview conflicts. But this isn't the whole story. We've been talking about reasoning. What about rationality? And what about this word rational that we use a lot? So we have reason as an aspect of our nature as human beings. We're rational animals, rational political animals, if you want to add that in there. And so reason, the laws of thought, remember, the laws of thought, is natural for human beings. It's an aspect of our nature. It's not cultural. It doesn't depend on where you're born. It's not conventional. It's not dependent on your sex or your race or your background. And because it's natural, it's universal, and because it's universal, it's a source of common ground for all human beings. And this is good news. But it's not neutral. It's common ground, but it's not neutral ground, because we're all going to reason from our assumptions. So we need to back up sometimes and examine our assumptions and reason, argue for our assumptions. Reason is also ontological. This is the one I'm fascinated with. This is the one that's connected to the logos. It's ontological insofar as the laws of thought are also the laws of being. And this is where Aristotle talks about the laws of thought is in his metaphysics. It's not in the logics, the logical works. It's in metaphysics. And he is talking about being. So reason applies to being, to things, the laws of thought. A is A, microphone is microphone. It is what it is. And he's going to say this is the most indubitable thing there is. So reason tells us some things can't be, like a square circle, or an uncaused event, or being coming from non-being. Can't be, right? So reason is going to rule out certain, they're not even logical possibilities, ontological possibilities. All right, I hope you're thinking of your objections right now. Reason applies to being, to all being, including the being of God. This makes some people uncomfortable. Wait, what? Well, if reason applies to being and God's a being, then reason applies to the being of God as well. God can't be both eternal and non-eternal in the same respect and at the same time. So this should make you be wondering, what is reason then? Is it eternal? What is this logos? What is this logos that they were searching for in the early philosophy? Reason is transcendental. It transcends other sources of authority. It is authoritative insofar as other sources of authority, like scripture, your parents, the government, are using words, and words are expressing meaning. They're using concepts, and they need to be interpreted. So other sources of authority require interpretation, and reason is the tool that interprets all authority. So it is the highest authority. This is my favorite part in that handout. It cannot be questioned, but it makes questioning possible. Because when I first heard that, I was probably the one with the bumper sticker, question authority. I was like, that's it. I'm going to question reason. And I went home, and I thought to myself, if I question reason, I have to use reason to question reason. If I want to make an argument against reason, arguments are the third act of the mind, which is reason. So I couldn't do it. This was like the last piece of rebellion on my part. I always thought of myself as a rebel. This was where I had to let go of my rebellion and say, that's it, I submit to reason. And everything changed at that point when I said, all right, reason is the authority. I'll let reason be my authority instead of me being my authority. Okay. Reason is fundamental to other aspects of the human soul. And I think we heard this earlier today. Our intellect, if you want to put it that way, our thinking is prior to our emotions and our will. Our emotions are about something. Our emotions are about things we believe, and we believe them by reason. And our reason is to rule our emotions and our will. We talked about that earlier too. This is another piece on that handout that really struck me. Our use of reason is the source of our greatest good, and our denial of reason is the source of our deepest misery. I used to think that's just some philosophical flourish. That's just philosophers doing their words. But as you think about it, if we're rational beings and that's part of our essential nature, then it is good for us to use our reason. And when we use reason, not just minimally, but maximally, then we understand the nature of ultimate reality. It should bring us to know what is and what ultimately is. It should bring us to know God. And that should give meaning to existence. But imagine if we don't use reason. If we're rational beings and we deny our nature as rational beings, then we are acting contrary to our nature, and we're harming ourselves. We harm ourselves by not knowing and by not understanding, and we are going to fail to find meaning. And when we don't have meaning, that's when life becomes unbearable, miserable. We fall into despair at that point. So these are the three pieces of reason that I got from that handout. Reason in itself is the laws of thought. Reason in its use, and reason in us. And I've held on to those, and I use those daily, and I tell my students this is a hill I'm ready to die on. I try to get them on board with reason. But here's some problems I've seen, okay? Problems with reason. I'm titling this part, Misuse and Misconceptions. And maybe you won't like this one. This one might cause some sparks. But sometimes we talk about making a split between theoretical and practical reason. This is kind of the division between Plato and Aristotle, right? Plato, or Socrates, says if we know the good, we can't not do the good. There's no division between theoretical and practical reason. So they disagreed over that. But what is it to know the good? To know the good and to do the good. So I would say, I'm going to side with Plato on this one. Maybe we can argue over cocktails. I don't know. What about rationalism? What is that about? Because a lot of people get turned off on reason because of rationalism. So maybe rationalism is the use of reason constructively to build systems, but not using it critically to examine the assumptions upon which the system is built. And a lot of philosophers have done this, right? So system building without critical analysis of the foundation upon which we build. So that would seem to be a misuse of reason, or a halfway use of reason. What about logic? Is reason merely logic? Well, they say that logic is the science of the laws of thought. But some people feel like, well, if you talk about reason, you're reducing everything to logic, and that's such a cold, boring world, right? We shouldn't divorce the laws of thought from the laws of being, as some, I'll call them modern logicians, have done. Aristotle wouldn't do that. He wouldn't say, logic is just a system, and there are many logics. I put a call out on Facebook for all the objections to reason from all my friends, a lot of philosophy people, grad students. And one of them was saying, well, don't forget, there are many systems of logic, which means the laws of thought could be in conflict with each other if they produce contradictions, right? I'm not sure about that. Logical systems are not the same as reason is ontological, describing being. Systems don't always touch reality. So let's examine your system and let's see if your system describes reality at all. Okay, here are the others of reason, the non-cognitive others of reason. And I'm going to say these things happen when we neglect or avoid or resist or deny reason, the laws of thought. If we throw out the laws of thought, we have to continue somehow, and we continue with something non-cognitive. We don't use thought, we use something else. It's really hard to live consistently with this, though, because we're rational beings. We have to give an account of what we're doing. So we'll say it feels good, but saying it feels good is still a reason. So it's hard to be consistent in the non-cognitive realm. But let's just see where we could go if we didn't use reason. We could go with emotion or intuition or feeling. Maybe some people claim reason doesn't give us knowledge, feelings do. I know things directly, intuitively, but feelings, emotions, intuitions have to be interpreted still, right? We have to make sense of it. So it does seem like we're not getting away from reason, we're just saying we are. We could use emotion to get other people to act. We try that sometimes, right? If we don't use an argument, maybe we'll use fine-sounding rhetoric, appeal to their feelings. Something Dr. Redpath said last night made me think of poetry in the spirit of the artist and the sophists as an alternative to reason, because I have some people I know, I'll just say, that are very into postmodern philosophy. And they tend to not like what I'm saying about reason, and they want to laud the sophists. They were doing something good. Maybe they were teaching us to persuade people with fine-sounding words, but does that get us to truth and reality, or have they already denied truth? So philosophy becomes the play of language, maybe. And what does language represent? Are we still bypassing reason? Language represents thoughts. So signs about other signs unendingly? Aristotle wouldn't allow that. He's going to say that there can't be an infinite number of predicates. So I don't think so. What about nature? Is nature opposed to reason? Is nature an other of reason? Look out here, how beautiful it is. Isn't that better than just cold, boring talk? Or is it, if you were using reason, you would understand nature? Nature is highly rational. That's what the logos and the thing is, right? That's what the philosophers were trying to grasp and understand. That's what science was about, right? Understanding what it is. So you can't understand nature. Maybe you can feel in nature, but you can't understand nature without reason. If there's meaning in the world, then the tool for grasping meaning is reason, identifying, naming. What about mysticism? What about some, religious ecstasy? What about the claim that we can go beyond reason through some mystical experience? Well, what about this? A lot of different religions have the claim to mystical experience. And how would we know how to interpret the experience? Are we interpreting that experience in light of what we already assume? So I think that if we look at it, we're still using reason to interpret the experience. I had some experience of nirvana. Well, why was it nirvana and not a union with a theistic God? Well, because I already believe in Buddhism. So we're already holding on to assumptions and not recognizing it. What about the will or pragmatism or instrumentalism? We've been talking about instrumentalism today a lot. Maybe there's just this mechanistic thing in the world. Maybe we should separate those out. I actually have questions. Maybe we can talk about this later. Pragmatism is saying maybe we can't understand things through reason. We just have to get on with life and do what's practical. But what's practical still has ends in mind. We just are not being honest about it. We do what works, but what works for what goal? And how did we get that goal? What about people like Richard Dawkins, who claims to be speaking in the name of reason, and they have the reason rally? But really what they mean is something like science or scientism or empiricism. So we may appeal to an external experience as a source of knowledge, but fail to recognize that we're still interpreting that experience in light of our assumptions. So we can't really get away from reason. Maybe you want to argue with me, but I know you'll be using reason when you do. What about informal fallacies or rationalizations? This is one of my colleagues raised this. He said, we don't teach the informal fallacies anymore, and people think they're reasoning and they're not. Informal fallacies are bad reasoning, phony reasoning, fake reason, right? So we may reason poorly and think that we have reasoned well, or we may come up with poor excuses thinking they are reasons. But this is where reason is a test for meaning. We could say, you said this. Do you recognize your assumptions? Or you said this. What does that mean? The little logic textbook that I use has an example. Rationalizations are never reasons. I like that. Rationalizations are never reasons. They're bad reasoning, right? This is one I heard recently. Are you suggesting we go back to logocentrism and the patriarchy? I heard that in a conference and I was just floored for a second. I was like, how'd you come up with that from what I was saying? But then I stepped back and I thought about it for a moment. And I think the question comes about because the logocentrism critique has been just thrown out there as a nice buzzword. But logocentrism, as I have understood it, is the privileging of the dialogue, the discussion over the written word. But if we think about it, both the dialogue and the written word are still words, and words express concepts, and concepts are the first act of the mind. So logocentrism seems to be a misnomer. And the patriarchy, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give the males reason. Every human being has reason. So we all get to reason together. So reason is not particular to any race, class, gender, culture, civilization, and to suggest so is dehumanizing. I wish I had that on the tip of my tongue at that conference, though. I thought of it later in the car. It's always the way, right? Critique. What about critique? That's what this book was about that I'm reading. How, out of this Enlightenment challenge, the thing that remained of reason was critique. And critical theory comes out of that. And look at how great critical theory has been for us. We're critiquing ourselves to death. So all that's left of reason is this negative pointing out assumptions until there's nothing left. I would say critique is one aspect of the use of reason, but those using critique are generally uninterested in using reason to critique their assumptions. So I would say, come, let's reason together and examine all the metaphysical assumptions that you're trying to unmask. What about madness as the other of reason? Derrida loves this. Nietzsche went into this. Is madness an other of reason? I really have been thinking about this a lot, and maybe I'm wrong, so check me, especially those who are familiar with psychology. It seems to me that this kind of madness is the result of the failure to use reason to find meaning. Madness, at least in Nietzsche's case, is the result of the denial of the use of reason at the basic level to find out what is real, and it's the use of reason at the constructive level to follow the implications of his assumptions that he hasn't examined. So Nietzsche both failed in the use of reason critically, and he excelled in the use of reason constructively, following the implications out to their end, which led to nihilism and meaninglessness. So one must use reason critically and constructively to find meaning and to continue to grow in meaning and to avoid madness. But I don't know, maybe some people want to relish madness. All right, two more. Skepticism. I'm going to say skepticism is one aspect of anti-reason. And it assumes uncritically and without reason that nobody can really know by reason. And I find skepticism as my biggest roadblock in the classroom. Maybe last night we saw it, right? Nobody can really know, and I'm going to show you. The other bigger roadblock for us is fideism. Fideism is another aspect of anti-reason. It assumes, uncritically and without reason, that nobody can really know by reason, but one must believe anyway, blindly perhaps despite reason. And some people embrace this blind leap. Now, that's not the same as faith. I'll let Professor Anderson talk about faith and reason, but fideism is not the same as faith. There are others we can talk about that have come up: the body, miracles, chaos theory, religion, as others of reason. But I'm going to pause here because I think we've got a pretty good list. In conclusion, I'm going to say that we, starting here, must retrieve reason, the laws of thought, for the sake of the individual seeking meaning, for the sake of the future of philosophy, because without reason, philosophy is dead, for common ground in a global context, actually even in the context of this room, for the culture, for Western civilization, and for the future global culture, or what I'm starting to call the kingdom of God. So I will pause here, and I invite questions, comments, concerns, objections, pushback, agreement too. I like that too. In the future, I will be writing a book. I'm hoping to call it Retrieving Reason, where I will develop these points. And I also want to do something like a syntopical entry for reason. I don't know what that will be called. Maybe you can help me figure out what to call that. And a longer-term project is the Logos of history and the history of the Logos. That's going to be something like a history of the conflict in philosophy over what we mean by reason. So, thank you very much.